for joining us again for the 5th in our GeoTalks Express series. In this session, we're going to be taking you outside. We're going to take a little break out from the confines of our quarantine or our lockdown. We're going to take a simulated trip outside. I'm joined today by my colleague, Jeff Hatzel. Jeff is going to be giving us a guided tour of our mobile application, Global Mapper Mobile. Are you there, Jeff?
I am, David. Hello, how are you doing?
Glad to have your help today. Jeff is the resident guru, the resident Global Mapper mobile guru, and he's going to be giving us a guided tour of the application, and then we're going to go through a few simulated workflows. I'm going to play the role of data manager. I'm sitting in the comfort of my office, and I'm going to send Jeff out into the field, out into the wild, wet, and snowy neighborhoods of Rochester, New York, where he is right now, and he's going to pretend to collect some data for me, and we're going to see how that process works, and we'll see Global Mapper Mobile in action. We'll see how that works with the desktop application. So that is the plan for the next hour. Before we get rolling, those of you who have not joined us in our previous sessions, a few housekeeping issues just to kind of remind you how this system works. You are in listen-only mode. You can hear us, I hope, but we cannot hear you. So if you would like to communicate with us, there's a questions panel on the right side of your screen. You'll see the GoToWebinar panel would have appeared when you logged in. One of the sections of that panel you'll see says questions, and if you pop that up, you can ask us questions. Put your questions in there. We will try to answer some of those during the session, and as we've done in our previous GeoTalks sessions, we will answer all of them afterwards, and we will share the responses through a blog probably sometime in the next few days. That's our goal. So you'll see all the questions that were asked and the answers as well. This session is, as always, being recorded, and I need to check as my to-do items. Yes, it is. I always have to verify myself that it is being recorded. This will be processed over the next few days as well. You will get an email with a link to this and to the other GeoTalks Express webinars, and you have the opportunity to watch those in your free time and in your own time. If you're watching the recording of this, obviously questions are not an option, but you have the opportunity to contact us directly. If you have questions about the content that we're talking about today, or indeed anything about our applications, you can send us an email. I will give you that contact information at the end of our session. So for today, what are we going to be doing? Oh, actually, with apologies, let's pause. Let's see what's coming up. Preview. Next week, actually 2 weeks from today, we're going to be introducing the latest version of Geographic Calculator. The release is going to happen within the next couple of weeks. 2 weeks from now, we're going to have my colleague Sam Knight, who's going to be conducting a presentation on the latest features and functions of the new release of the Geographic Calculator. He's also going to give a little bit of an introduction as to what exactly that is. I know some of you out there probably are not familiar with this software, so I'm going to recommend you sit in on that one. You'll get the kind of initial overview as well as a new functionality. That's coming up on May 27th. Moving into June, we're going to do a case study. We're going to take a look at practical application for LiDAR, specifically for archaeological research. Later in June, we're going to be coming back to Blue Marble presentation. We're going to introduce our pixels to points tool. That's part of our LiDAR module in Global Mapper, our photogrammetric point cloud generation, our ortho image generation tool. We're going to simulate the process of taking some drone images and essentially creating our 3D data. Some of you are familiar with that tool already. If you're not, I strongly encourage you to sign up for that session on June 24th. Registration is open for these as it is for the other presentations coming up after. So feel free to register at any time, and you will be guaranteed a spot in those presentations. So as I was saying, well, today, what's on the cards for today? Well, we're going to begin by defining what exactly Global Mapper Mobile is. Some of you are probably not familiar with it. You haven't used it. You're not familiar with it. So I'm going to kind of take a high-level look at what exactly it is. I'm going to hand the screen over to Jeff, and he's going to tell us, or give us, I should say, a little bit of a guided tour of the main components, just a brief overview, if you like, without getting into anything workflow specific, just kind of the principal elements, of the key elements of the app. I'm going to take over at that stage, and I'm going to simulate, as we mentioned at the start, the process of creating data or preparing data that's going to be deployed to the application. As we get into kind of defining what Global Mapper Mobile is, you will see that it is actually connected directly to the desktop application, in that the desktop application Global Mapper is used to create data and also to manage the data that's collected on the device itself. So we'll take a look at the components of Global Mapper, the desktop application, that are applicable in that context. We will then talk about how you get data onto the device. Very simple. We're going to simulate this today, obviously. We're not going to do this in real time, just in the interest of streamlining our presentation. We'll pretend, but obviously Jeff has got some data to work with already. And then he's going to take over again and take a look at the layers that I sent him, the data layers. And he's also going to do some data collection. He's going to simulate the process of collecting data. He's going to show us the digitizer, which is our drawing function, and going to drop some points on his map there and assign attributes. And ultimately, we're going to take those back from him, and me playing the role of data manager, I'm going to integrate those back into Global Mapper. So kind of coming full circle, starting in Global Mapper in the desktop, sending data to the device, and then transferring that data back into Global Mapper Mobile again. So once we have that data back in the desktop application, what can we do with it? These points that we've created, we can show how that would integrate maybe into your existing GIS. So let me begin by answering that first question. What exactly is Global Mapper Mobile? One thing to clarify, and some people are a little confused at times, it's not a mobile version of the complete desktop application. In other words, while the desktop application includes analysis functions and it includes a broad array of automated digitizing functions, vector modification tools, raster processing tools, the desktop application, the mobile application is basically a viewer and a data collector. That's the primary functions. It doesn't mirror the functionality that you get in the desktop version of the software. I like to describe it as an extension of the desktop application. It allows you to take the maps from your desktop version of Global Mapper and carry them with you into the field. And as we've been mentioning, it also works for data collection as well. And we'll see that in action just a little bit later. Provides field access to data from the desktop version of Global Mapper. Now you think about all of the data formats that you can work with in Global Mapper. Now you can take those and put them on your phone or on your tablet or your iPad and bring them with you into the field. It does include some digitizing and drawing tools, as we'll see a little bit later. You can draw, you can collect data. Obviously, it's GPS enabled with the GPS chipset in your device. And it does offer the option for self-contained map storage. Obviously, in many situations, you're not going to have a data connection or a mobile or a cell connection. So having the necessary data stored on the device is important, but we also offer streaming. Now, depending on which version, and we'll get into the versions in a little bit, we have a preset streaming service that's available. It's OpenStreetMap. Or if you go with the Pro version, which we'll talk about, as I said, in a bit, you can stream any data. You can basically set up your own web map services or use some of the pre-configured imagery services to allow streaming of data as well. So self-contained map storage or streaming are available. And as I've been mentioning, there's a Pro version as well. Jeff, I think, is going to give us a little more detail as he goes through the application, which components would be in the Pro and which components are available in the standard version. So that's just a high-level overview of exactly what Global Mapper Mobile is. It is an app that's downloadable from the App Store and Play Store if you have not used it, and we're going to find out who has not used it. We're going to do a little poll a little bit later, but you can grab it today. You can go to the App Store or Play Store and grab a version and download it today. So why don't we take a look at the app itself? Jeff, I'm going to give you control of the screen, and
okay, David.
You can give us a quick guided tour.
Okay, so everybody should be seeing now Global Mapper Mobile Pro. David had mentioned there's two different versions of the app. As we walk through today, everything I'll be showing will be available in the Pro version. I will try to note anytime we're looking at a certain tool that's Pro. If I miss that, the full list is on our website. You might notice, for those of you who have the app currently, we're looking at slightly different graphics here. We are currently in the beta period for a new release that's slated for sometime in the summer. So I'm working in that beta version today. Hopefully it cooperates with us as we get going here. So for right now, we're just going to take a quick little overview of the app, kind of to point out where things are. For those of you who are familiar with Global Mapper on desktop, the home page should seem fairly familiar. Standard logo for the application along with some shortcut buttons. We also have one menu. That menu will have options available to us or perhaps not available yet, depending on what state we are in the app. For right now, I'm just going to load some default data. When that loads, we'll see this is just a global vector map. I can tap and drag on the screen to pan around on my device. I can pinch in and out to zoom. So a fairly intuitive mobile interface there. Anytime I need to specifically interact with certain layers, that's all done through my control center. We will get into later on what options I have here and how I can interact with my data in detail, but that can all be handled from the control center. Just next to the control center is where I access my location or my GPS functionality. So if I needed to enable GPS a certain way, I have all of those options here. And this would control location services by default based from the device. I will show a little bit later on a new feature we have coming out for version 2.1. That'll be some advanced GPS functionality that will be available in Pro, part of the next release. Global Mapper Mobile does have a few tools that are available to us as users. So we'll notice the toolbox on the bottom left here. So by default, we have our digitizing tools active, and we will look at each of these with some relevant data later on, essentially a variety of ways to create points, lines, or polygon features. We'll go through looking at our measure tools, our search tools, and our GPS averaging tools as well. I will point out in our menu, we have a full set of configuration options, and we'll start to dig into some of those, controlling simple things like display, GPS settings, and some more advanced options as well. So as we start to look at things in a little bit more detail later on, we'll talk about all of that too. For right now though, David, I think it's probably a good time to go back to you so you can show us how we can set data up to have it then sent to Global Mapper Mobile.
Sure. A couple of questions come in already, Jeff. Somebody is asking about GPS accuracy specifically. I'm not sure if this is something that you have in your to-do items later, but in terms of using maybe a higher accuracy GPS receiver, I don't know if I want to talk about that while I'm transitioning the screen back here.
Yeah, sure. So the short answer is if you're using your device's GPS, it's going to be whatever the accuracy is from your mobile device. That's usually about 5 meters. And I'll get into some details later on what happens when we're using an advanced GPS unit.
Yeah, like an external GPS device. So
yep.
that,
We'll talk all about that.
Question, the answer to that question is pending. So yeah, as Jeff said, and as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, the story of Global Mapper Mobile begins and ends with the desktop application. We do, as you saw in Jeff's brief introduction, provide a base map, kind of a default data set, if you like, similar to what we do on the desktop. If you click that load default data button, it brings up a world map, as we do in the mobile version as well. Don't know how useful it is. It's there to help you kind of get familiar with the app, but in terms of its actual practical value, probably not so much. So in order to make the mobile application valuable, we need to start here in the desktop. Now, Jeff happens to live in Rochester, New York, and by coincidence, Jeff, I have some data for your neighborhood, and don't know exactly where his house is. It's somewhere on the screen, and we might find out in a little bit when your GPS is enabled. But again, we're going to simulate actually a couple of different workflows. I am the data manager. I am sitting in the comfort of my office. I'm going to send Jeff out to do some work. Now, the first simulation we're going to do is basically sending what you see on my screen to Jeff. I'm going to essentially take a collection of layers. I've actually got some additional data here that I'm going to send to him for maybe field verification or just for visual representation. As you can see on the screen now, I've got some base imagery. I have some roads, and actually I'm going to load another layer from off screen. I'm going to drag and drop the parcels, the property information for the city of Rochester. So here we have a lot of information. We even have attributes. If I click on one of these properties, you can see all of the information we have. I'm going to send all of this to Jeff. He's going to do some work in the field. He's going to be doing some field checking perhaps. I need to take this and package it up. Now, I should pause briefly. I know there are those of you joining us that have not actually used Global Mapper. So with apologies if you're not familiar with kind of the broad functionality that I'm avoiding in this presentation, go back and look at one of our previous webcasts. We did an introduction right at the start, and it'll give you a kind of a high-level overview of some of the principal features and functions. So you have that resource to kind of backfill and give yourself that information. For today, we're going to assume we know how we got our data in, we know how to manipulate it, how to display it. Now all we need to do is take a snapshot of what I have on my screen and send it to Jeff. Again, as you'll see on my control center over here on the left of my screen, I have 4 different layers. My DTM, by the way, we're not seeing because it's under the imagery. If I turn the imagery off, you'll see we have some terrain data right underneath. So we have 4 different layers. The format that Jeff needs for his device, for the mobile application, is a proprietary format called a Global Mapper mobile file. You may hear referred to as a Global Mapper mobile package file as well. There is a dedicated export option to create a Global Mapper mobile file. As you can see, well, my cursor is moving a little bit. My mobile file option is here, right under the export sub-menu from the file menu, export Global Mapper mobile file. Few different options here. Some of these, if you're familiar with Global Mapper, you'll have seen before. For instance, export bounds. We can define the extent of what we want to export. Just for the purpose of what we're doing today, I'm just going to send Jeff what's on my screen. We can tile this exported data. In other words, rather than creating one single GMMP file, we can create multiple files. We can break it up into manageable chunks, if you like. We can apply simplification to the vector features to reduce their size. We also have a few options in here in terms of how we manage projection. The current projection on my screen is UTM. That will be retained by the file when it's sent to the device. I think Jeff is going to tell us a little bit about how we manage projection on the device when we get there. Defining the zoom level, we usually suggest automatically having the zoom level defined within the file that we generate is a good idea. Few things, a thumbnail will be generated. So basically what you see on my screen, we'll have a thumbnail of that on the device. Jeff will show us the layer management capability, and we'll see that thumbnail on there. We can combine our vector layers into a single layer, just picking out some of these options. Not really useful in my case. I want to keep my roads and my property boundaries separate so we can manage them independently on the device. So we'll keep those separate. And if we had associated picture points, we can embed those in this file that I'm generating as well. So I may have a photograph of an asset that Jeff is going to visit, a junction box for electrical supply. I may take a photograph of that. So when Jeff gets to that location, he can actually click on the picture and actually bring it up on his screen, and he can actually see what that should look like. Or it could be a schematic or something of that type. So you can embed images or picture points right in the file that we generate. Obviously not relevant in my case, but that is an option. So with these settings applied, I'm just simply going to click OK. Let's go ahead and drop these in my folder here. I'm just going to call this one Rochester. Oops, if I can type. And we'll just save. That, as you'll note, is a GMMP file. That's the file that the mobile application consumes. So that is scenario number 1. That's a simple application where I take the contents of my map, package it up into a single file. That's a very efficiently compressed file, and I'll talk a little bit about how I get that to Jeff to put on his device. I'm going to create another file. Now, this first example I showed you is simply for data visualization and a little bit of interaction. Jeff can look at the attributes for my vector features, etc. For the next example, I'm going to do a slightly different workflow. I'm not going to save the changes to my workspace there. I'm going to bring in a different workspace. Now, you'll notice that this is a fairly empty workspace. I've got this bounding box. That's the entire extent of what I want to export. It really doesn't have any function other than to define the bounds of where we're going to be doing this work. But what I want to do in this example is I'm going to create a form for Jeff to collect data. Now, in this context, it's not necessary to have a base map. He doesn't need to see where he is necessarily. As Jeff walks around the neighborhood, he can go to a location where he's going to collect some data. And we're going to use the example of some fire hydrants. He can go to a fire hydrant. He doesn't need to see that on the screen. He knows where he's located. He can simply tap on the screen to tag that location, and as you will see, he can then add pre-configured information about that asset. So in this example, what I'm going to do is essentially create a form in the desktop application that is going to allow Jeff to collect that data. Now, this process begins in the configuration area of the desktop software. As you can see here, under Configure, if I select the configuration or click on the configuration button, there's an option here called Feature Templates. These templates allow you to predetermine what characteristics are going to be assigned to the data that's collected. And you can build your own library of templates. I've got one you'll see here called fire hydrants or hydrants. This is the example that we're going to use today. You could have one for manholes, you could have one for whatever else, utility poles, whatever else you're collecting or whatever else you're inventorying. You can have these pre-created and assigned to a layer on an as-needed basis. Now, rather than going through the entire process, I'm going to take this example that I've created previously and I'm going to edit it. I'm going to add a few additional attributes. Before we begin, just kind of quickly going through the process, this template has a name. Obviously, it reflects what I'm going to be collecting, hydrants in my case. I can give it a text description, just free-form text to describe exactly what it is. And this is a point template. You can create a template for lines or for polygons. The most common application is going to be for points. You can define what that feature type is. I'm just going to leave this as the generic unknown point type in my case. And if I want, I can apply a default name and a default description if that's applicable. I'm leaving those blank because they're not required in this case. When we go to the bottom here, you'll see the pre-configured attributes that have been assigned. Now, this is obviously something I did earlier. This is like a cooking show where I have the ingredients, I've described the ingredients, but I'm showing you one that's finished. Each of these would represent an attribute that's associated with the point. And I add these by simply clicking the Add button, as you see here. Assign the attribute a name, define the data type, whether it's a string, integer, float, or Boolean. This is a fairly new addition to this tool where you can define what the characteristics of that particular attribute should be. In other words, if I make this attribute an integer and Jeff tries to type in some text, it will tell him, no, this is not applicable. I need an integer. Or vice versa. If we putting a string, he can basically type anything he wants in there. That's a free-form text entry. So basically, you can define the characteristics of that attribute using this tool. You can also edit these. The maker, this is my fire hydrant, simulated fire hydrant data. The maker information, if I click the edit button, there are 3 variables in here. I assume, hoping there's nobody who's a fire hydrant engineer in the audience in the attendance list today, because this is not my field, but apparently these are real manufacturers of fire hydrants. So as Jeff is going around collecting this data and identifying the fire hydrants in his neighborhood, he can assign whatever the maker is. That information would be on the fire hydrant itself. Now, in order to set this up, what we do is we go to the allowed values. And under allowed values, you can see the 3 variables that are allowed. I could add another one here. I could type something else, the Acme Corporation. So this gives us a pick list that Jeff can choose from. In other words, when he assigns a point, he's going to be asked to choose from one of these 3 variables. In this case, he's not going to be given the option of free-form text entry. So he's going to have that pre-configured list. There's another format here, the floating point value, the diameter. Again, we'll go into the edit area here. And in this case, again, allowed values is basically 2 variables here, and Jeff will be allowed to pick from those 2. A couple of other options to note here. Is the value editable? I would say almost always you will want the value to be editable. Very rarely will you just assign data and say, well, you can't change it. There may be maybe an attribute that's just there for visual reference, just to give Jeff some information that he cannot change. But most of the time, Jeff is going to be the one your field technician is going to be the one who's going to be adding this information. Also, and perhaps more importantly, is the fact that that value is required. He can't ignore this, and you'll see this when we actually do the data collection, he will not be the option to cancel the data collection will not be available. He will be required to make a selection before he proceeds. So this gives you, as a data manager, and that will be me in this case, complete control of the structural characteristics of the data that are going to be returned to me when my field crews send the data back to me. So again, this is one that's pre-created. I was going to add another couple in here, but it looks like they've been added already. But you get the idea as to how this works. Each of these attributes are added manually, edited as needed, and then the other elements of our template are added, as you can see here. We click OK. And right now, these just exist as a template. The way that we actually create a layer based on this template is right down at the bottom here. We have the option to create an empty template layer. From this selected template, in my case hydrants, I click this button, and now I'm creating a layer. I'm going to call this Rochester hydrants. And you will see when I click OK that this now is added to my control center. I've finished with the configuration. This is always going to be available to me for creation of future layers. But for now, I'm done with this. I'll just cancel out of the window. And I have a template layer. If I expand the little the tree view, you can see Rochester hydrants is here. This is now waiting for the data to be added. This is the only situation in Global Mapper where you can have a layer that has no features. It is completely empty. There's nothing on my screen. It's waiting for data, but it is now empty. I could begin the process right here in the desktop. I could use my point tool and drop a point on the map, and I would be prompted to fill in the same attributes as Jeff will be. But in this example, in this workflow, we're going to take this structure, this workspace, if you like, capture it as a Global Mapper mobile file, and again, simulate the process of sending that to Jeff for field data collection. So the process is exactly the same as before. File, export. We'll go to our Global Mapper mobile file format. Again, you can see the various options. Again, we'll use the defaults as before. Export bounds. We're going to confine this to what we see on screen once again. Actually, we'll use the layer bounds in this case. The extent of my collection area, that's all I need. And obviously, in this case, it's not really that important because there is no data. In fact, we could define this just without any reference data at all. We'll click OK just based on that extent. And once again, click OK. And we'll create a version of this called hydrants. I think, Jeff, the version you have is called Rochester hydrants or something like that, but we'll just call it hydrants for now. So this now exists, these two layers exist as GMMP files that can now be transferred to Jeff. How does that work? Well, a number of different options. I could send him my email. I could send an email attachment to all of my field guys and say, basically, guys, you guys are going into the field. Here's the template, or here's the layer into which you're going to collect the fire hydrants. They could be uploaded to a file sharing service, a cloud service like Dropbox or Google Drive. I believe Jeff used Google Drive a lot. We could also, if we have an Android device, simply connect that. It would appear as an external drive. We can simply drag and drop. Jeff will tell us a little bit about how that data management works on the device itself, but the mobile application will recognize the presence of that particular file and will allow you to load it automatically. Also, if you're still using iTunes, that was one of the original methods that we recommended, using file transfer using iTunes. So let's pretend that I've done that. Let's pretend, Jeff, that I have sent you the two package files that I've just created, and you are now going to go into the field and do some work for me.
Okay.
Let me give you the screen.
So as I bring my screen up here, I noticed a couple quick questions pertaining to the Pro version of Global Mapper Mobile. Global Mapper Mobile Pro is a separate license compared to Global Mapper Desktop. So if you have Global Mapper Desktop licensed, you can still send data to Global Mapper Mobile and use it, but you won't have some of the Pro functionality. The Pro functionality or the Pro license can be purchased either through us by contacting our sales team or by purchasing within the app. So, okay, so David has sent me some data, and I'm going to look into how I can get that into Global Mapper Mobile. So anytime I open the app, I'll be taken to my home screen, and probably easiestly, I'll use the quick shortcut button here to open a map. Now this will show me a list of all the maps that I already have on my device. So while I've already saved the maps that David sent me to the device, I just want to highlight at least one way of getting data into Global Mapper Mobile. So if I use the download button here, this allows me to file browse on my mobile device. So I can browse to a variety of locations to choose where I want to get my data from. Alternately, I could go to any of these apps or my email on my device and choose to open the GMMP from there directly into Global Mapper Mobile. So that can be done however is best for your workflow and how it works for you to share data. So in this case, I already have a data set here, and we're going to open that first data set David was working with. And so once that loads, we'll see that I have the 4 layers that David sent me are now here and present in my mobile workspace. If I open my control center, I can see those layers listed here. If I click on each layer, it will quickly toggle it on and off. So I will hide the display of whatever feature I click. By clicking on it, you'll see the layer itself grays out, and now they're no longer displayed on my map. Well, we happen to be looking at some terrain data here. It's worth noting that we'll now have full terrain layer support in Global Mapper Mobile. So previously that data was just converted to a standard image file, but with the release of version 2.1, we'll be able to load data, set and adjust shaders, and see elevation values. If I go into any layers options, I have the ability to move layers around. I can view metadata. I can now set translucency. So if I need some ability to see through certain layers, I can set that now in mobile too. Just for an example here, so I will keep my imagery off for a second, although it's not necessary. With the terrain layer loaded, if I enable my crosshair location, I have the ability to see the elevation at that crosshair. So if I move my crosshair around my map, we'll see that my elevation value adjusts with me, and it's doing so based on that location there. Let's go ahead and turn that off for a second, and we'll get all of our other layers displayed again here. So I'll turn the display of those on, and now we'll talk about some of our tools. So Global Mapper Mobile has a variety of different tools we may choose to work with. As I had mentioned earlier, we'll see by default my digitizing tools are enabled. I'm actually going to do some live digitizing in a little bit. So before we get to that, I want to highlight some of the other tools and functionality which the app has. If I go to my toolbox, I have the ability to see the tools that are available to me. So perhaps I want to search. So I have some vector data loaded. I want to enable the ability to search for certain features in the field. And when I go into my search options here, the first thing I might choose is an attribute or multiple attributes on which I want to search by. In this case, let's look for based on a certain description attribute. And maybe we will see if there's any schools near me, so near where I am. I can select multiple attributes here if I wanted to, and I could also further filter by feature type if I only wanted a certain type of feature searched. When I hit OK, that search will execute, and we'll see once it completes that we have a school now, and that feature is selected on the map. So the tax parcel that represents that school will be highlighted. I can choose then to, if I need to delete that feature, clear my selection, create a new search, whatever I need to do, I have that functionality down here on the bottom toolbar. For now, I'm just going to clear that selection. That will be cleared from my selected features. And let's go ahead and we'll take a look. One more tool, let's take a look at the measure tool. So with the measure tool enabled, we'll see that I now have my crosshair visible on my map. So let's zoom to an area we can see a little better. What I will do is a tap or a click will place my first vertex. I can then pan over to another location, and once I'm at a location where I want to place my next measurement, I can tap or click again to place the next vertex on my measure here. So what I'll see is that I have both my segment length and my total length. Obviously, right now I've only placed 2 points, so I have only one segment. But let's say I place another point here. When I place that point, I will now get the adjusted segment length that represents that latest segment and the overall length. I can undo the placement of vertices, complete my my measurement however I want to interact with that once I've completed it. Let's go back for a second. I'd like to have my digitizer tool enabled, and I'll bring my data a little bit more on screen here. A couple other things I'd like to highlight before we start to look at digitizing and creating some features. When I have data loaded on my map, we'll see now that all of my menu options are enabled because I have now different ways to interact with my data. So one feature I may want to do is I may need to add another data set to this package. So let's say David sent me some data, but then he forgot a layer. If I have the Pro version, David can send me a new layer and I can add it to an already existing GMMP. So that can be very useful. We'll talk about online data and saving and exporting in a little bit, but let's take a look at all of our configuration options. The configuration settings allow us to do quite a few things. If I've already purchased the Pro module through Blue Marble, I can register through here, or I can restore a subscription. This would be for iOS users only. Android users would purchase through us. I can set a variety of display-based settings. New to version 2.1, I can adjust my shader. So we saw my terrain layer before. I could pick from a variety of other built-in shaders that are also in Global Mapper Desktop. I'll also now be able to display my water level if that were ever necessary for me. We have a whole suite of settings associated just for my GPS. So what are my record intervals and distances? Do I want to have any beep or sound when I record my features? I happen to like that. I keep one enabled. And then one I want to highlight here is the projection information. So when David was packaging up this data for me, he mentioned that it was in the UTM projection. When you include a projection with a data set out of Global Mapper Mobile, and it's not one that the app natively supports, you'll see that it says mesh-based. All that tells you is that it's a projection that's contained within the GMMP. That does not prevent me from going in and changing to another built-in projection if I wanted to, and I'll always be able to go back and forth between the built-in ones and whatever was originally created with my GMMP. So I don't need to change any of those now, but I wanted to point out where that functionality was. I know a lot of our users look for that.
I'm going to interrupt you briefly, Jeff. Quite a few questions coming in here. Some of these I can get to, some I think you may be answering anyway. Somebody's asking about the elevation value that you displayed and wanting to know where that came from.
Yeah, good question.
It came from the DEM, the underlying elevation. It's actually reading the pixel-based Z values or Z values in the underlying DEM.
Yes, absolutely. And that does not need to be visible on as my top layer, right? So right now we will see, I can see my layer elevation even though I have an image sitting on top of it. So as long as the layer is loaded and visually on in the control center, we'll be able to grab that information from that layer.
Sure, right. One other question, I can answer this one. I'm wondering to know if that feature template or the layer that was derived from the feature template, if it's can be used in the non-pro version. The answer to that is yes, you can do the data collection without the pro version. Question about Dropbox. I don't know if you're, I know when we finish this process, we're going to talk about transferring the data back to the desktop application, or to me, I should say. Maybe we'll get a little bit more about how the Dropbox process works at that stage. Somebody asking about tracking, about creating a track file. And I don't know, again, we're not doing that in real time, but maybe you could talk to that one a little bit later.
Yep, sure.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a good segue. Why don't we actually switch over to another data set here where we can do some actual digitizing and creating features, and I can talk about some things like track locks and such. anytime I'm completed with a GMMP, I could choose to save it or export it if I've done anything that needs saving. In this case, I haven't, so I'm just going to choose to unload my map. Takes me back to my home screen. And so right now, I'm going to open another map that I've already downloaded. So this will be the hydrants workspace that David was working with in desktop. When I open this data set, all I have is the data which David included. So that includes this bound set. We by no means need this. So this data set also has that template layer that David created. If I just had that template layer, I could work with this anywhere in the world. However, since I'm in the field and in a certain area, sometimes I find it helpful to have a bounding layer with my data set. Now, just because our data provider, in this case, David, right? He could be sending a simple data set like this to people all around the city, all around the county, whatever the case may be. So he may not want to provide all of us base imagery data or some kind of reference map, but maybe me in the field, I want to have a little something to make sure I'm in the right spot, just to reference properly, whatever the case may be there. And so what I'm going to do now is add an online layer. And so I can do that from my main menu, and the option to add an online data layer. The free version of the app will have one source. I'll connect to that source now. It's an OpenStreetMap source. The Pro version, as you're seeing here, will have not only a variety of other built-in sources, but you also have the ability to add your own. So if you use your little plus button down here, you can add your own custom sources if you have something to connect to. In this case, I'll just connect to Global Street Maps, just so that I can see a little bit of a background and a base map of where I am. That layer will also be added to our control center, so I can see it listed here along with my other data. I might choose to move it to the top, just so when it's displayed, I can see my vector data sitting visually on top of it. So at this stage, we'll say, okay, I'm out in the field and I'm ready to think about how I digitize and how I create features. Now, today we're just going to look at creating points, but the same premise will apply for both lines and area features. So when I open my point feature create menu, we'll see there's a variety of different ways I can create points. So I can manually tap. Anywhere I tap on the screen, the point will be created where I tap. GPS tap option, that will be wherever I click on the screen, the point will be where my GPS is. Someone had asked about tracking your movements. So you could do that either based on distance or time. So as I'm moving, I can record a feature, whether that's a point or a line vertex or an area vertex. In this case, I have mine set to 10 meters or 10 seconds. You can adjust those values in configuration, but as you move, those values will auto update. Unfortunately, I'm not outside today, so we're not going to be able to show that. If I have pictures already on my mobile device that are geotagged from my phone or my tablet, I can add those as points to the map as well. So we're going to take a look now. First, I think we'll go ahead and make a manual point. So I'm out in the field. I know where a hydrant exists. Let's say in this case, I'm at this intersection right here. When I click, the point feature is created. By default, it's added to my templates layer. So David set up this template for me in desktop, and I have all of those pre-canned attributes here. Now, if I go right now and click OK, I'm going to get a pop-up window. And that's because David made all of these feature attribute entries required. So I can't leave this page without confirming all of my options. For right now, I'll just leave whatever was set as the default. But the point is that this allows you to control what your users in the field enter about their data, because they may or may not know what to add and how or where to add it. That will complete the creation of my point. I can always go back and edit that. If I select my selection tool here, my first click will select the feature. Second click on that feature will open up my feature window again. So maybe I need to add a notation. Maybe I want to now take or grab a picture from my camera roll or edit attributes as I need to. Excuse me, add new attributes.
Yeah, Jeff, that's a good segue. Sorry, there's somebody that's asking a question just when you brought that up about adding pictures. So I don't know if you want to give a little more information on how you can add a picture or maybe take a picture. So let's assume you've just gone to that fire hydrant.
Just going to say that.
Good
yes.
segue, perfect segue.
Let's say I'm outside in front of my fire hydrant. We have a very quick and easy tool that allows me to take a picture of that point and add it to the map. All I need to do is click anywhere on the map with a long hold, so tap and hold, and it will open my camera. Now we can pretend my GIS textbooks are a fire hydrant, and take that picture. It'll ask me to confirm if I want to use it. In this case, I do. And now by default, that's added to the map as a picture point based on how I did that. I could certainly select the point and choose to edit it and move it to my hydrants layer if I wanted to. I could then set all the attributes just like I set previously. To elaborate on that a little more, I'll do so actually right now, and I'm going to make a GPS-based point. So I'd like to introduce not only GPS-based digitizing, but also the ability to connect to an advanced GPS. So I can enable standard device GPS through this menu here and choose any of these settings. What we have new and what we're looking at in this beta version is the ability to connect to an external higher accuracy GPS unit. So in this case, I have a GPS device sitting by my window. Hopefully we're still getting a good signal. I'm going to choose the advanced GPS option and to connect to that device. Now my tablet currently only has one device connected to it. And so it's worth noting outside of Global Mapper, the device is paired with my phone or tablet, and it's connected through the device's own app. So almost every GPS unit will have its own app that needs to be connected as well. But that's outside of Global Mapper. That's done. I can connect to that device. I'll be told my connection is successful. Now, when I enable my location, I'll see on the map, let's move this a little bit, I will see that the name of that device, my location, my elevation, and the fact that I have no accuracy inside. In addition to being able to see and use that location, I can also see advanced information from that GPS unit. So I can see a summary of location information. So this grabs everything from my GPS device directly. I can take a look at what satellites and what constellations are being used from my satellite info. So right now I only have GPS satellites, but if GLONASS or Galileo or any of those are available, I would see those displayed here as well. And then last but not least, I could also take a look at my NMEA stream. So I can see that stream live. I have the ability, if I need to pause or clear the stream. And I also have the ability to record the stream. So we have a lot of users who need to record a snippet of the stream for further use down the road. You can record here. When you've received sufficient data, you can pause that recording and choose how you want to get that data out of the app. I'm not going to do that today because I don't need to save any of that. So that will be, again, new and pro functionality with the release of version 2.1. And now, whether you're connected to an external GPS like I'm using now, or just the standard device GPS, you can create points based on your location, regardless of what type of GPS you're using. So in this case, I'm going to choose a GPS tap. Since I'm not outside moving, there's no sense in recording based on distance or time. What this will do for me, and I could do this for a line feature or an area feature as well, anytime I tap on the map, a feature will be created.
Jeff, while you're doing this, it might be a worthwhile point to bring up. Somebody is asking about unique icons, I guess symbology of points in this case. You want to talk through that?
So I can, now this will actually be part of version 2.1. I'll have the ability to select any feature styles for those points that I would like. We also could have embedded them when we exported from desktop to mobile. So when David created that template layer, if there was some kind of feature style set for it, that would be retained as well. Anytime you make a point feature based on GPS, it will want to go to your GPS field data layer. In this case, I would probably change that to my hydrant since that's what I'm recording. We'll see now, not only do I get my GPS information with that point, but I will also get my hydrant information as well. Someone had asked about adding pictures. So let's say I created a point this way, I wanted to add a picture to it. I could choose my camera icon and choose how I want to, either from the camera or from my picture library. In that case right now, I don't need to do that, but that is how you would add those pictures to that point. They would be retained when exported out of the map. And that kind of brings us to a good point here. So let's say I have finished in the field. I turn off my GPS here. We can see my camera points. And I'm probably sitting right on top of the camera, so we won't see my other digitized point, but it's in the same location there. So let's say I've completed my work in the field and I need to get that data now back to David or whoever my data manager is in the office. First thing I will need to do is to save my map, because without the map being saved, we don't have anything to export. When I choose my save option, I can either save to my original map or save as. With the Pro version, I can also save my online imagery for offline use. So this will only save the online imagery that I have loaded into this GMMP. And if I'm ever out in the field later on and I don't have a data connection, but I need this data set, I'll be able to load it locally. For right now, I'm just going to choose to save my map. I have some options here as to what types of data I want to save. Once that save has completed, I can export the map. Now, I don't have an email client set up currently, so I can't email it, but I can upload to a file location. Again, somebody had asked about Dropbox. So if I had Dropbox on here, it would show up on this list and I would navigate it just like I'm navigating in Google Drive. I could choose the folder to where I'm saving it and things of that nature. And of course, since I had saved my map, that would also still exist in my Maps list. So that data set is still here as well. And so while David's getting ready for looking at that data on desktop, just a couple other quick maps I'd like to highlight. So here we're looking at this happens to be a nautical navigation map. So we have a lot of users who are out using this type of data as reference while they're working in coastal scenarios, using it as reference, adding data on top of it, and things like that. Some of you may also work with, maybe you're working with some historic imagery. So in this case, I have both current and old paper georeference maps here. So I may be recording data live in the field now, but I might also need to reference certain information from this historic imagery. So just another interesting way that Global Mapper Mobile is being used in the field currently. I've also personally used it. You know, you go on a hike, I want to test my map. So maybe I choose to have a topo map loaded as my base map, so I can have a reference base map here. I could also add a terrain layer to this now if I wanted as well. So David, I think that pretty much wraps up everything I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, that was it. The questions are coming in thick and fast. With apologies, once again, I didn't mention that this is at the start, but if we don't have a chance to answer your questions now, we will answer you directly after the presentation's done, and we will post all these questions. So yeah, Jeff, a couple of questions I can ask you while you're still on the line there. Yes. Someone's asking about the external GPS. Is that only available in Pro, or can you use an external GPS with the non-Pro version?
Yes, the external GPS functionality will be Pro only.
Okay, yeah, and somebody asking how much Pro costs, or what's the cost of Pro?
So Pro is an annual subscription, and I believe that starts at $50 a seat.
Okay, yeah, and we'll get to the others. As I said, we'll get to the others when we have a chance after
sure,
the.
I did see a couple questions about file formats. What I will say is that more or less anything that Global Mapper supports can be included in a GMMP file. Mobile can also handle GeoPackage format and GeoPDF as well. Just a couple things to keep in mind as separate types of data sets you could work with.
Yeah, so I mean, going back to how we started, it directly integrates with the desktop application. Well,
yes.
Thank you, Jeff. That was fascinating. I mean, really powerful application. And again, you saw a little bit of the functionality. It's not a direct, a one-to-one comparison with the desktop application, obviously, but it does extend its capability and allowing you to take your data into the field. We've got a few minutes left, and I had meant to do this earlier and completely forgot, but I'm going to ask you guys a question. Those of you who are still with us, we're going to ask you if you're actually using this application. And I should tell you, it is free. The basic version is free. You can go to the Play Store or the App Store and download it today. So I just want to know how many of you are actually using it. On an Android device, on an iOS or Apple device. And I know some of you are using both. Jeff, you had mentioned there's a few folks that you've been in touch with actually have both devices. So
Yep.
give you a few seconds here to let us know if you're using it. Oh, quite a few are not yet using it. Those who are not yet using it, there's your to-do item for the rest of the afternoon. Go onto the App Store, Play Store, and you can download it. The base version is available at no cost. So just a few more seconds.
While those questions are while that poll's getting answered, David, I saw a couple questions related to file size. We don't necessarily have a file size limit in terms of creating a package file on desktop, but keep in mind that most of the time you're working on a mobile device that's going to have much lower hardware specs compared to a computer.
Yeah,
so
that's
don't
why
expect,
why the streaming services are good, so you don't have to have that high capacity or the high
absolutely
imagery stored on the device if you have got the data connection. So as you can see, most of you are not using it. There's your to-do item for this afternoon. Go ahead and grab it. Go ahead, download the free version, and you can do a lot of things that Jeff was showing us today. It'll be the previous version, but that new version will be out, as Jeff mentioned. And I think sometime in June, I believe, Jeff, the release of the next version.
Yeah, that's the tentative plan as of now. We have a beta period going currently, so we have a lot of beta testers looking at the software too.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jeff. Let's go ahead and we'll hide that. So just to wrap up, again, I promised we'd go full circle. Jeff collected some data for me. Thank you, Jeff. It's very useful. And I don't know if you noticed, but the date that was noted at the top of his iPad was January 9th. I believe it was January 9th or January sometime. I guess the clock wasn't correctly set. Anybody who's been to Rochester, New York in January knows it's not the most pleasant time to go outdoors. So really appreciate Jeff getting outdoors, battling the snow and the wind to collect some data for me. And I'm going to take
we had a frost this morning too, David. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to take a look at just obviously a simulation of what he collected. You really can't see what he's looking at. We added some generic points here. First of all, I'm going to change these to be a little more easy on the eye. I'm going to do a quick edit for the points he collected for me. I'm going to make them actually look like fire hydrants. This is again something you can do on the desktop. He could have done this in the mobile application as well. I actually have a hydrants symbol here. We'll make them all look like hydrants. There we go. He collected 3 fire hydrants for me. So again, we come full circle. This is a version of the layer that I sent to him that was empty. He sent it back with 3 fire hydrants. He collected my attributes for me. If I click on one of the icons, we can look at the feature information. Here's all of the information that I asked him to collect for me. This is great. We could bring in files from multiple people. In other words, I could have had 5 or 6 guys in the field for me, 5 or 6 people, and all contributing to this master layer. We can collectively manage these. We can integrate them into a single layer. We can export them collectively into a shapefile, for instance. The other thing you will have noticed when I clicked on the icon, we had the option to address the fact that there was an embedded file. In this case, it's an image. And if I click on that and from off screen, I'm going to drag there. We've got a nice picture of a fire hydrant, and it doesn't look like January. What, Jeff, were you actually out there doing that data collection? I don't know. I think you cheated a little bit. No, you can see that that embedded image that Jeff mentioned is now a linked file connected to that point. Obviously the same for all of the points. So again, coming full circle. Starting with the desktop application to prepare the data, to prepare the template for data collection. Jeff did all the busy work. brings it back to me, and I now have consistent data. The fact that there was a form-based data collection process, all of my data is going to be consistent, and I can then, as I said, manage it internally in Global Mapper or export that as necessary. So, which brings us, unfortunately, to the top of the hour. This was a kind of a snapshot of the mobile application, what you can do with it, touching on Pro, touching on the base version. Hopefully you got an idea as to its capabilities. Please go ahead and download it. Go ahead and grab a copy, especially if you're a Global Mapper user. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't, if you have the desktop application, have this on your mobile device. I think somebody was asking about whether iPad or iPhone, what's the difference? It's just screen size. It'll work on any iOS device, any Android device. Obviously, Jeff was simulating the use of a tablet, the iPad. More screen real estate makes it a little easier to work with, but certainly it will work on your phone as well. I have it on my Android phone. So if you have questions about licensing, and we can talk about enterprise licensing for the mobile, the Pro version of the mobile application, please send us an email, orders@bluemarblegeo.com. If you have any questions over and above the questions you asked today, and we will, as I said, respond to those, geohelp@bluemarblegeo.com is where you'll send those questions. If you're not using the desktop application, obviously that's, as we've described many times, that's a stepping stone to using the mobile app. You can go ahead and download a trial, bluemarblegeo.com/trial. You can grab a trial copy, and if you have any questions about the application, there's an opportunity for you to ask us. We'll give you a demo if you need to show you some of the key functionality to make sure it works well in your workflow. Jeff, thank you so much for your expertise and for braving the cold of Rochester, New York to collect the data for me today.
You're welcome, David.
And thank you all for joining us. We will see you in 2 weeks for the What's New in Geographic Calculator GeoTalks Express series. Thank you.